The Supreme Court has agreed to take on many high-profile cases this year. We look at some of the biggest from a Catholic perspective. Just 2 weeks ago, the justices ruled in favour of a controversial ban on the social media platform TikTok, even after President Trump asked them to do otherwise. Now, Trump himself has put the law on hold. But even with executive action, TikTok's future remains uncertain.
And somebody's going to buy it, make a lot of money, have a lot of jobs, keep a platform open, and have it be very secure.
The president is eager for a deal. On Monday, Trump told a gaggle of reporters on Air Force One that he is working to find a solution to keep TikTok online. This comes just weeks after the Supreme Court ruled the ban constitutional. The bipartisan law requires TikTok's Chinese owner, ByteDance, to sell or lose access to the app stores and web hosting services. The federal government, under the Biden administration and lawmakers, had argued TikTok poses a national security threat because of its ties to China and the personal user information it can tap into. But TikTok says the ban violates the First Amendment rights of both the app and its 170 million users. After briefly going dark in response to the court's ruling, TikTok returned within hours once Trump told his acting attorney general to hold off on enforcing the law. Now TikTok must find an American owner by April or disappear from the US.
It may have Chinese origins, but this is American people, American employees, American businesses, American lives.
In another high-profile case, the justices will decide whether Catholic charities' work serving the poor and disabled is, quote, sufficiently religious. Wisconsin law allows religious groups to be exempt from state unemployment taxes as long as their activities are religious in nature. But state officials and the Wisconsin Supreme Court determined that the charity is not exempt because its activities, quote, neither attempt to imbue the program participants with the Catholic faith, nor supply any religious materials to program participants or employees. Catholic Charities hopes the Supreme Court will recognize service to our neighbours as a core part of the Catholic faith.
The sacramental part of the church is important. There's no question about that. But out of that sacramental life of the church comes that call to mission. And to split them, we're just denying who we are.
The court is also looking at Catholic education this term. St. Isidore of Seville Catholic Virtual School hoped to provide a high-quality, faith-based education to students throughout Oklahoma, particularly those in rural areas. It would have been the first religious charter school in America. But months before the new school year, the Oklahoma Supreme Court ruled St. Isidore's violates the separation of church and state. The Archdiocese of Oklahoma City, which would run the school, says the ruling discriminates against St. Isidore's simply because of its religious nature. The High Court agreed to weigh in and will likely hear the case this April.
We are imploring the Board of Education to respect our First Amendment rights to religious freedom.
Parental rights are at the center of McMood versus Taylor, a case from Maryland. In 2022, the Montgomery County School Board added books about pride and gender ideology into its curriculum, but it did not allow parents to opt out their children when these books are being taught. In response, a group of religious parents, including Muslims, Protestants, Orthodox Christians, and Catholics, is challenging the school board because they say the books violate their religious beliefs on sex and gender. The parents hope the Supreme Court will affirm their right to direct the upbringing of their children when it hears the case this spring. Well, for analysis on these cases, we welcome back Adam White, legal scholar and senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Adam, it's great to have you with us.
Thank you.
Let me start by asking you, the Supreme Court, it continues to put a major focus, it seems, on freedom of religion. Why do you think the justices are agreeing to review so many religious liberty cases now?
Well, I think they're hearing the cases because there are so many cases to hear. Again and again, we've seen direct conflicts, especially at the state level, between local government and state government and religious liberty. We saw this especially during the COVID-19 pandemic years, and that continues, especially in an era when you see policymaking being made very quickly on the fly by administrative decision makers.
And Adam, can you explain the question at the centre of the Catholic Charities case? Can the law really define whether the work of Catholic Charities is, quote, sufficiently religious or not?
Well, this case reminds me of an old line from Justice Scalia. I think he was the one who said that so many in government, especially on the left, they tend to think of religion as no more than what you do in the privacy of your own home and the privacy of your own mind. But of course, religion is something we live out in our daily lives. What Wisconsin has tried to do here, obviously, is to construe religion to exclude most of what religious organizations and especially Catholic organizations do in their charitable activities. What Wisconsin's done is really to constrain religious organizations to fail to serve their local communities.
And if we move now to Oklahoma, the story of St. Isidore's, it could become the first government-funded religious charter school in the entire nation if the Supreme Court rules in its favour. Is there a precedent for this case in terms of a school's choice?
There is, according to the school. The Supreme Court in recent years has decided a number of cases where they've said that religious organizations and schools cannot be deprived of government support that's put out on a general basis to the public at large. What complicates this case is that, according to the Oklahoma Attorney General, under Oklahoma law, charter schools are themselves public schools, and that the government's regulation of a religious charter school would deeply intertwine government and religion. And so there seems to be precedent for the arguments on behalf of the school, but it is a more complicated case, I think, than some of the recent precedents.
And how could this impact the future of school choice?
Well, it's going to vary first and foremost from state to state. It really does turn to some extent on the extent to which states try to micromanage religious schools that receive government support. But for the last decade or more, the Supreme Court has over and over again preserved a lot of space for religious education in the school choice arena. And I expect that to continue, if not in this case, then in other cases.
Adam, in Maryland, parents, they're asking the court to allow them to opt out their children from curriculum if it, for example, includes Pride storybooks. What do you envisage the justices doing in this case?
I think the justices are going to rule on behalf of the parents who do not want their children to be required to participate in this part of the curriculum. The school board is making what sounds like a very sort of even-handed appeal for the schools to be in charge of just general education. But of course, anybody who's followed these debates in our society for the last decade knows there's a lot more than just neutral education, let alone reading education, going on with the provision of these books in schools. It really is an attempt to advocate against the religious beliefs of a great number of Americans, and not just Christians. And that's what we've seen force the debate here in Maryland.
Now we're moving on to TikTok, and as he promised, President Trump has stepped in to help TikTok, giving the app an extra 75 days to find an American buyer, telling his administration not to enforce the ban. Is he defying the Supreme Court's order, or is he still working within the confines of the law?
He's not defying the court's order. The court merely held that this TikTok law does not violate the First Amendment. But what President Trump is doing in refusing to enforce the law for 75 days, it does defy the terms of that law itself. There's no provision in the TikTok law for this kind of delay. And I think that the way that it's been framed here by the president, it really does raise real questions under his own constitutional duty to faithfully execute the law. Presidents, like other executives, often have some discretion to delay somewhat or tailor the enforcement of a law for the sake of prosecutorial discretion. But what President Trump is doing here seems to go much further than that.
And what do you think will happen next? I mean, when you look at TikTok, it's one of the most popular apps in the world with hundreds of millions of users across the globe, extremely popular here in the United States. If they cannot find a buyer, what do you think will happen?
Well, I do think there's a deal to be made here. It remains to be seen, but it's anybody's guess. I'm just the lawyer, and when it's come to try to predict political outcomes in the last few years' environment, it's very, very difficult to see exactly what will happen. But I do think there's a deal here to be made.
Adam White, it's been great talking to you, and thank you so much.
Likewise.